So I don't want to sound biased, but these two ladies sitting next to me is kind of dope. And so a lot of people don't even know the behind the scenes, but it took us a long time to get these two amazing women in the same spot at the same time. And so when you see us geeked, we're like, hey. So I can't wait for you to hear from them. Again, I might be a little biased because I think Future of Food at South by Southwest is the itness anyway. But one of the things that's very interesting about our story is that when we first was approaching this, a lot of people were like, why would you have food and climate change in the same conversation? And again, go back some years. This is not this year. And we thought that was so silly. We were like, well, why wouldn't you talk about that? So one of the things one of the first questions I want to really come out in our conversation is the why. Why talk about those two things? So y'all, I want to introduce Cassie is to my far left. She's with the United Nations and their climate policy. And to my immediate left is Julia Collins, and she is with Planet Forward. Can I say the other one still? So y'all, again, once a founder, always a founder. So just a few days ago, this fabulousness that is this black woman sitting to my immediate left had an exit of Moonshot Snacks. That's those yellow boxes that we have everywhere that we wanted to make sure we give her a shout out. Patagonia acknowledged that what her and her team built, Kaya and Rachel, what they built was worthy of a climate company making that investment. And so can we just give that a round of applause? So Cassie, we'll start with you with that question. Why food and climate?
You can't tackle the climate crisis without talking about food. Mm-hmm. You really can't. Mm-hmm. And the interesting part about food is that it is both, a huge part of what we're facing when it comes to the climate crisis. It's nearly 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world. It takes up 70% of our fresh water. It is a huge part of how we use resources. And it's being hugely impacted by the droughts and the floods and all of these things that we know are coming because of the climate crisis. And so even though when we think about climate, sometimes we think about smokestacks, sometimes we think about cars and trucks, we have to think about farms and food systems. How we grow our food, how we process food, how we distribute food, how we consume food, how we dispose of food is at the heart of what we have to do on climate.
Absolutely. What about you, Julie, and the work that you've done? Why food and climate? How did you even think, let's have Moonshot Snacks?
Cassie, opened up with such a great frame, which is that, if you want to change the world, change food. Mm-hmm. Right, there are more than 8 billion people on the planet right now. Most people are projecting that number will be 10 billion people really shortly. Wow. And the fact is, all of us have to eat every day. Mm-hmm. And so what if we could leverage the power of all of us eating to drive faster toward a climate solution? Cassie raised some really important statistics. Nearly a third of global greenhouse gas emissions come from food systems and land use, 70% of water. And in most cases, when we're talking about solutions to the climate crisis, we're talking about reducing the harm, right? Reducing the harm so we get to a point where maybe in an end state, an industry is neutrally impacting. But food has the power to do more than that, to go beyond just mitigating and getting to a neutral impact and actually having a positive impact. And not just greenhouse gas emissions, because carbon is wonderful. Carbon is a source of life, and we talk a lot about carbon. But climate is bigger than carbon. Mm-hmm. Climate is people, first and foremost. It's the people who grow our food. Climate is soil, the source of life and diversity. Climate is biodiversity. And so people are often like, you work in climate change, you're awfully happy for a person that works in climate change.
Because it can be dismal sometimes.
It can, right? And we'll have a whole other, conversation about the importance of imagination in this work. But I wake up every day happy in the work that I'm doing because I really do believe that if you want to change the world, change food. And food has an unprecedented ability to be a part of the solution.
Absolutely. Y'all, Julia just teared up just now. You can't see it. I'm not even joking.
It doesn't take much.
So one thing about you two is that you're in the weeds, right? Like, oh my gosh, you see it every day. It's what you wake up with in the morning. It's what you think about most likely when you go to sleep at night. So for the audience who's not in the weeds, what is the current state, like level set for us, where is climate today, either on a global scale or if you want to even make it more closer to home in the United States? Give us a level set.
Yeah, well, internationally at the United Nations, we all have galvanized around the Paris Agreement. This is our North Star when it comes to climate. And essentially what the Paris Agreement says is we're going to collectively cap global temperature rise at 2 and ideally 1.5 degrees. And this is a really, really important number because we're already at 1.1 going on 1.2. So we are on the precipice. We are on the threshold of all of these impacts happening. And we can already see it, right? A lot of summers are getting a lot hotter. Sometimes the winters are getting a lot hotter. We're having more storms. We're having more droughts. We're having more floods. People are already seeing this on their doorsteps. And when it comes to, being able to tackle this, we have nearly 200 countries in the world that have said, all right, we are going to put forward a pledge on climate change. This is the first time that's ever happened. And it sounds so basic when you say it, right?
Yeah.
It's like everybody bring something to the potluck.
Like duh.
Yeah, like duh. Like, this is a big crisis. We all have to do something. But when it comes to climate, and we see this so much with food, that it affects every country so differently. It affects every community so differently. And even with food, 60% of people in low-income countries in the world are employed in the agriculture sector. And so the impact of what we do with food systems has huge implications for jobs and economies around the world. And so at the UN, we're really trying to hash this out, and we have big negotiations. All these people get around a table with those little ear translators on, and really try to hash out how we can help countries to be as ambitious as possible, because we have a long way to go. And food is a really, really key part of this.
Very good. What about you?
Yeah, I think suffice it to say that we are currently not on track, right? I can say that. That's level setting. That's truth telling. That's being honest. But anytime that I do that, I'm very careful to make sure that I level set really close to a what we can do about it statement, right? Because if we all get stuck in a place of dread or shame or blame, then really nothing happens, right? It's like all about what can we do collectively to move the conversation forward. So yes, we have an unprecedented level of coordination from global leaders that we haven't had before. I think what is also incredibly encouraging to me is youth-led solutions to the climate crisis.
Yes.
Like, I am 44 years old and I am doing my best, but but the people who I get up inspired by every day are people who are decades and decades younger than me, who are speaking truth to power, who are more elegant in the way that they organize and use their voices than I think any generations have ever been before. And so I think that is another important thing to recognize, is we've never had a generation like we have now that is empowered in the ways that they're empowered now around speaking up. And I think that's going to be, I think, the thing.
I love that. Were y'all just informed just now? I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, okay. One of the things that is very powerful about Cassie and Julia being on the stage is that they each are from a different side of climate, right? And so for this next question, I want you to put your solution hat on, because you're absolutely right. We can stay in the negative, dismal part of it all day. Like, right, that's easy. That's the easy thing to do. It's a lot harder to put on a more how do we do something about this? Like, right? So from your perspective, the United Nations, like, how do y'all look at it from a solution standpoint? And then, Julia, you're on the side of the tech side of it and the building a infrastructure and a company that does both the solution and addressing the food. Like, so I would love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when you talk about climate change, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. You see all of these terrifying headlines, and you think, oh my goodness, who's really doing something about this? You know, because it seems that this train is not slowing down. And over the past few years, we've only seen it speed up. And this is where, you know, at the UN, something that we are really trying to focus on is how do we get everybody at the table? Because food systems affect everyone. Everyone eats food. It's like back to the basics here, yes. Right? And caring about how all of this is connected. And you know, what you were talking about earlier, too, I mean, in terms of being able to have climate a part of this conversation is so important that, you know, even just a few years ago, it's like, hey, why would you have a climate panel, you know, when you're talking about food? Like, what is that connection? To be curious about it, to share your own experiences about it, and to be able to innovate, because we need all hands on deck, you know, and this is why I'm so excited about what Julia's doing, because it's, you know, bringing to the forefront, like, women leaders, businesses, like, innovation, tech. We need all of this. We need to put this, you know, times a million to be able to meet the challenge that we need to meet.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it really all goes back to this experience that I had becoming a mom for the first time, you know, at almost 40 years old. And it was just a total paradigm shift for me in terms of what life was and what I was doing here, you know, and I had been working at the intersection of food and technology for decades, you know, always tangentially trying to solve the problem of using technology to improve food systems. And I did some cool things like making pizza with robots and, you know, lots of interesting things. But within the context of being responsible for another human, there was just a sense of impatience that I had to really act on, you know. So I run a technology company, but, you know, technology doesn't actually solve problems. People do, you know. People utilize technology. And we care a lot about data, but data doesn't actually change behavior. Stories change behavior. So how do we use data to help people tell better stories? So the work that I'm doing in data and technology is all related to humans. It's related to stories. It's related to people. And it's heart-centered work that really comes from my experience of being a parent. It's deeply personal. From the outside, we may look like a slick climate tech company with a beautiful SaaS solution. At least I hope we do. But at our core, we are a team of really passionate people. I'm looking at Kylan, I'm looking at Rachel, I'm looking at Anna, who's part of our fold now. And I think that human-centered perspective is really important as we do this work. And I'll say just one more thing, Q, which is, you know, it's also important to think about the framework, right? Like, what is the framework? Are we decarbonizing global supply chains? Yes, we certainly are. But we're also regenerating people and food systems.
And that's a powerful word.
Yeah. Are we reforesting or are we rewilding? Right? Are we, you know, shifting agriculture, or are we returning to indigenous principles of being connected to the land? And so I think changing the framework and changing the mindset changes the outcome. And this is, again, why I'm really inspired by youth-led solutions to the climate crisis, because they're calling into question not just what exists now, but how we need to fundamentally change our thinking to bring about what has to happen next.
Yeah. Okay, I was caught in the moment. Yes. So one of I remember when we were talking on Clubhouse. I know that's old, y'all. But one of the things we always challenged anyone who was speaking on the stage of Clubhouse is that we hear the information, we hear what's going on, and yes, we do the talks around solutions. But what I would love for each of you to speak to is that how empower each individual who's online, and y'all, we had over 699,000 people watch us yesterday online. And it's incredible. So there's a lot of people globally who are looking at this besides who's in the room. How can you empower them to do their own individual climate journey to impact what looks like a huge mountain?
I think it begins with really learning and being present with the climate crisis. Being able to really understand how it's affecting your whole life and not being shy about sharing that experience. Because sometimes, you can get intimidated. And let's be honest, in this country, climate change it can be a pretty controversial thing sometimes. Mm-hmm. And you say climate, and then you kind of hide. And I think what's climate, go. And I think what's important is to be able to be true to your experience with this, to be a witness to what is going on in the world when it comes to climate, and to not back down from it. Because those experiences matter, and we are witnessing a shift in the planet in our lifetimes, and really being able to stay true to what that is and what that means for our lives is, I think, a real first step for anyone who cares about what is going on, and to be present in that.
I think what you're saying is so important. I remember the first time that I spoke about climate change on a stage, I really thought people were going to throw tomatoes at me. Oh. But the thing about me is, if you want to throw tomatoes at me, I'm going to make tomato sauce. So I'm like, climate. And I do think, it's so important to be able to use your voice. I love the question about what individuals can do to help combat the climate crisis, but I also just want to say that I get a bit wary of the shift toward individual responsibility for climate, when I want to just shout from the rooftops that global organizations and governments must be held accountable right now. And so how this shows up in my own life is I do work to help massive organizations become more sustainable and climate friendly. But also at home, especially as I'm raising my boys, I do raise them as climatarians. And it isn't because I believe that each individual is responsible somehow. It is because these boys are living and growing up within the context of a rapidly warming planet. And they have to be able to live with optimism. They have to be able to live in an empowered way. And living a more climate-friendly lifestyle actually delivers more optimism. It doesn't feel good to waste things, to contribute to the global plastic crisis. It just doesn't actually feel good at this point, particularly when you know the impact of what you're doing. What does feel good is to be able to understand what decisions you can make. So we grow food at home. It isn't all the food that we need. We live in San Francisco, but we grow some food, and that really means a lot. The boys understand how to compost. We live more of a plant-forward diet, and all of these things, I think, contribute to a sense of empowerment and optimism that is just as important as the impact of decarbonization.
Very good, very good. One of the things that you said that I would love for you to speak on a little bit more, Julia, is that most people sit these type of topics on a shelf when really you have to adopt it as an entire lifestyle, so that every time you're making choices and decisions with your money or with your time or with your community, that you're really aware of the impact that it has on climate activism. As a climatarian.
Can I add one to your list?
Yes, please.
How you vote.
Oh! That too.
I'm adding how you vote.
So, speak to the lifestyle. And Cassie, please weigh in as well. Speak to the lifestyle, because again, I just don't want people to think, let's sit it on the shelf and take it off.
What I do know is that you don't have to be a founder or an influencer or a legislator or a politician or a climate scientist to take part. Actually, just the fact that you're in a body on the planet right now qualifies you to be a climate activist if you choose to identify that way. Just the fact that you are alive means that you are qualified and you are welcome. So that's number one. But money is powerful. Golly geez. And when I'm talking to people who are not necessarily in positions where it seems like they could have a direct impact within an organization, I often ask them questions like, do you have the ability to influence the decisions about how you're banking, where your 401k is? Because decarbonizing cash is an incredibly powerful lever. We really can, together we can, move our cash from the dirty 7 banks to banks who are divested from the fossil fuel economy. Together we can. Actually, y'all,
that's a really good idea.
We could flip that like a light switch. That doesn't require deep tech. That doesn't require a moonshot technology. That just requires awareness and coordination.
Love that.
And if I can add to that, something else that's really important is a particular responsibility as someone who lives in the United States, as someone who lives in Canada, as someone who lives in Europe, because the footprint of someone who lives in those parts of the world is many times over that of someone else. I mean, the average carbon footprint of someone living in India is the same as an average refrigerator energy use in the United States.
Wow.
Like that, when you think about equality and you think about justice and you think about what's happening with the climate crisis, that difference is something that we can't glide past. And so I think in particular, when you're looking at this and you are an American or you live in one of these places where just as a part of our lives is where the way the system is set up, the way our cities are built, the way the systems work, the way we get energy, it's a massive footprint. And so I think we also need to be very aware of the impact we can have when we start to pivot that. Because when we start to pivot that, there really is a butterfly effect across the rest of the world.
Love that.
And even within North America and Canada, folks who are living in inner cities contribute less emissions than folks who are, right? By virtue of where you live, how you live, the size of your house, the way that you access public transportation, all of these things show us that Black and brown communities contribute less and are disproportionately impacted. Our neighborhoods are literally hotter. We have more air pollution. You've seen what's happening with water. And so as we think about every crisis creates an opportunity. I mean, this is the truth. This is another reason why I'm optimistic. And I think the opportunity that climate change creates as it relates to equality is a just transition to a more nature-positive future can create economic opportunities for Black and brown people to be centered in the transition, centered through job creation.
And supported to be centered in that, supported to be leaders in that.
Yeah.
Y'all were vibing. I just wanted you to do your thing. Can y'all get a little more passionate, please? You're kind of low on the energy scale here. So we talked about individuals. We talked about, the community aspect. A lot of people who are not only at South by Southwest, but who may be watching, may have a startup, a business. What would you say to how they can partner with a government or organization with whatever they're tinkering with as a solution?
I think there's a lot of resources out there. I mean, you can start certainly online and really trying to learn and trying to connect with other innovators in your space. But I also always really encourage people to look in their own backyard first. Really start to look at how the climate crisis is impacting your neighborhood, your street. And sometimes this is just, a tree is blooming months earlier than it is supposed to. And then you can start to see, as you were saying, starting to see possibility, right? It's not a vacant lot. It's a community garden in the future, right? And how do you get involved in helping to make those transitions and find people around you that are passionate? I think also, at the UN, something that we are really trying to help encourage everyone to do is to be very aware of your national climate pledges. So under the Paris Agreement, remember all these pledges that countries have to put forward, they have a very wonky name. They're called nationally determined contributions. It was highly negotiated among countries, and every country, including the United States, has one of these. And so this is really a direction that you can see your country is going in. And by getting involved in those discussions, by really being able to push the needle, being able to help join up, saying, hey, the United States needs to be as ambitious as possible. The rest of the world is counting on the United States to be as ambitious as possible, and really start to bring your experiences and your voices to that.
You want to take that? I have a question that I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure that we leave on this note. So I'm going to ask the next question, Julia. It's already been interspersed in our conversation, but I just want you to center on this question that I love that Rachel and I from Julia's team are in such consistency about, is that what gives you hope for the future? It can be from a personal level. It can be an organization you're a part of. Like, wherever you want to go with that, you have the freedom and the space and our support. What would you tell people that gives you so much hope, being two people that are so entrenched in climate?
I mean, being hopeful is a choice. And think about what the alternative would be.
Right.
So that's one, right? I choose to live in a place of hope and optimism because that is where I'm powerful, and that is where I'm joyful, and that is where I choose to be. It would be equally possible not to live in this place, but I just wouldn't choose that. And at the same time, although it sounds a bit trite, to always talk about children, but it is the case that my kids really inspire
our future.
me. I was driving my 5-year-old to preschool the other day, and he said to me from the back seat, he's like, Mommy, all of this is made up, right? And I was like, is he okay? Are you okay? He's like,
are you made up?
Yeah. He was like, all of this is made up. Like, these cars, these streets, someone just made it up. What should I make up?
Oh.
Yeah.
Y'all, I would drop this mic.
Oh, no, it gets better. Get out your tissues. Then I said, okay, Mosi, if you could, his name is Mosi, if you could wave the magic wand and be in charge of the whole world, what would you do? What would you build? And he said, I wouldn't just build the things that I want to build. I would build the things that are good.
Julia, you're going to have to stop now. Look.
How can I not be hopeful?
From the mouth of a 5-year-old? Yeah. Oh, my gosh. Like, I hope to be that smart someday.
He's not like that 100% of the time. Just saying that. Y'all know.
So what makes you hopeful, Cassie? Take it
Along
away.
with your 5-year-old. That was fantastic. I think that back to the fact that when we talk about the future, and even like the title of this, The Future of Food, that people know the climate crisis is here, and they know we have to take action on it. We have very little time. We have a lot to do, but we are imagining now a future where we do have innovation, where we do have everybody at the table, where we can start to change the way the world works. And this is hard, it is tough, it requires us working together in a way that the world has never done before. But we know how to do it. We know.
Yeah.
And all we have to do is do it. And listen to your 5-year-old.
Well, I must admit, what makes us hopeful as Future of Food is that we can continue to get the attention of people like this. We don't take it for granted that they chose to come and speak and help inform and educate, which is so important to us on so many levels. Because if you don't have the information, then you can't go to the next stage and then say, what is the action that I can take based on what I heard? And so we hope that you were empowered. We hope that you're inspired. And we have hope that each one of you will go back to your homes, your communities, your church, your whatever your affiliation is, and share with you what you heard and tell people the time to act is now. Thank you. Thank you so much.